Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Friday, July 16th, 2021. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I am a senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I am joined on today's episode by Slash Film senior writer and chief film critic, Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
All right, so Chris, there's a lot of controversy swirling right now around a movie called Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain. And it is a documentary, as the title would imply, about Anthony Bourdain, who is a celebrity chef and author and television personality who died by suicide in 2018. It was a very super popular TV host character. And this movie is out now in theaters. And it was directed by a guy named Morgan Neville, who directed films like 20 Feet from Stardom and Won't You Be My Neighbor. And there's some controversy about this movie. But I guess before we get into that, I just want to play my interview that I did recently with Morgan Neville. So we talk about the controversy. Well, we don't get into the controversial aspects of it, really, because during the very end of our conversation, he revealed this thing, basically that an artificial intelligence program was used to create some of the voiceovers for this movie. So I just figured we'd play the whole interview with him, and then you and I can talk about the implications of that and sort of what is going on there. So before we get into it, here is my interview with Morgan Neville. All right. Hi, Morgan. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. So let's start at the beginning. Do you remember your first exposure to Anthony Bourdain?
Kitchen Confidential. Actually, he published an article in the New Yorker before Kitchen Confidential that caused a stir, and I read that article.
Like at the time that it was published?
Yeah, at the time. That's how old I am. And I read that article, and then when Kitchen Confidential came out, it was definitely the kind of thing that people passed around and said, "Yeah, you got to read this book." And I did, and then I didn't really pay that much attention for a while, because then he had a, Cook's Tour eventually for a couple of years, but I wasn't watching the Food Network on basic cable a whole lot in those days. But as once he got into No Reservations, and then he started just appearing more places, and I started saying, "Oh, I liked watching him." It wasn't appointment TV for me, but it was like a lot of people. Like when he was on, I get sucked into it, and I ended up reading Medium Raw, his second kind of autobiography at one point. So, and then it was really a lot of his other, I followed him on Twitter, and Twitter was built for somebody like Anthony Bourdain, just for a smart, snarky, person like Bourdain. Twitter was a godsend. And he loved it,
Yeah.
And so, so I liked him, but I hadn't thought that deeply about him other than, I knew through a bunch of my friends who were writers and food people, kind of how important he was for them. And even helping my friends who's starting Lucky Peach magazine, he kind of helped get that off the ground in the beginning, and had an imprint of his own through his publisher, where he was published my friend Chris Ying's book, and a few other, he was I just got a sense of he was a righteous guy who was walking the walk and, not just talking the talk.
Right on. So the narrations that he wrote for his shows, I think a lot of people, were some of my favorite aspects of those programs. And I assume that you had access to all of those files when you were making this movie. How on earth did you go about the gargantuan task of combing through all of this archival footage and audio to create a cohesive story in this movie?
I mean, so I had this idea that to make a film about Bourdain and not have him in some way narrate it would just feel odd. And so as I thought about it, I started thinking about Sunset Boulevard, the movie, and William Holden narrating from Beyond the Grave. And I was like, okay, this is that's my homage to it. And then when I looked,
that seems like something that he would have loved, right?
I think he would have loved it. But this is the kicker, that when I started watching old episodes of the early shows, Cook's Tour, season 1, he does an episode on LA at the Chateau Marmont, and he films himself floating face down in the pool.
Wow.
And, and I was like, okay, like he's already ahead of me on this. Like, and so then I got not only all of his voiceover, which we got all those sessions, but every book on tape and podcasts and radio interviews. And I went through all of it, and anything that felt like a really substantive line, we put into a spreadsheet. Basically, we ended up with like a 500-page spreadsheet that I organized by theme. So if it was Tony talking about food or talking about travel or talking about childhood or whatever, we organized it that way. And so I had this binder of kind of Tony on everything. And there was a very fleeting moment in the beginning where I just thought, should I not interview anybody and just have Tony narrate the entire film? Although I knew that wouldn't work. I mean, that was just like an interesting conceit, because the fact of the matter is, like, as great as a writer and narrator as he was, he had big blind spots about himself too. And that I was never going to get those in his voice.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually my next question. He was such an incisive and insightful and often profound analyst of history and politics and societies, and often himself, but not always. So I was wondering how you navigated how much of this story should be told in his words versus, how much of it should be told by the people that knew him. So it sounds like you were grappling with that pretty early on.
Yeah, I mean, I know at the end of the day, he couldn't tell that much of the story, particularly in his backstory. I mean, he was his own best subject. He always wrote about himself and, analyzed even a book like Medium Raw, Kitchen Confidential. He was a memoirist, always. And he loved kind of memoir, whether it's Down and Out in Paris and London, which is one of his all-time favorite books, the George Orwell book about working in kitchens in the 30s, or maybe it's even the late 20s, but I think it was the 30s. That, he did tell a lot of his own story in a really entertaining way. And even going back and looking at Kitchen Confidential, the thing that struck me was how kind of world weary he is in that book. He wrote it when he was 43, and there's a tone in there of like, I've seen it all, I've lived it all, kind of my story's over. And his story hadn't even really begun, which is crazy. But there's this passage in Kitchen Confidential that I, for a while, had in the rough cut of the film, and I took it out. But it's to your point, where he has this speech he gives, where he says, to paraphrase, if I'm walking across the street and get hit by an ice cream truck someday, and I'm lying in the street and they're pulling the bumper out of my head and I'm just drawing my last breaths, am I going to regret that I didn't eat a certain thing or travel to a certain place? No, I'm only going to regret how I disappointed those around me who cared about me. It was like, he wrote that when he was 43.
Wow.
So even though, he was also very good at owning his own flaws.
Yeah,
I guess is what that is.
Yeah, certainly. So in addition to being a recounting of his trajectory, to me, this movie is sort of about the impossible task of trying to capture the real version of someone. And even armed with all of these tools that you had, the archival footage, the talking heads, and his social media posts and stuff like that, how close do you think that you got to getting to the heart of who Bourdain really was in this movie?
I always feel like my films are about questions more than answers, and the idea of kind of that, oh, yep, you got it, that it was just tidily summed up is so un-Bourdainian. I mean, there's a quote of his I found after I finished the film where he said, the root of most of the world's problems can be attributed to people trying to find a simple, fucking answer, and that the gray of what existed in life was kind of where the interesting stuff happens. And I think Bourdain too is somebody who was an immensely protean character, who was always kind of shape-shifting. He was slightly different with different people, and that what I kept coming back to, not only this, but in most of my films, I say, I'm just trying to get an essence of like a real essence of who this person is. It's not all of the truth. It's not all of the dimension, but it's feeling like, yeah, you really feel like you kind of understand an essence of who this guy is. And hopefully we got that.
Yeah. How did you decide, we were talking about Kitchen Confidential earlier, and that's sort of almost being the start of his story. And in your movie, that kind of is the start of the story. How did you decide that as the starting point here?
I mean, a couple of reasons. I mean, one was I didn't want to make a 6-hour film, and part of it is, there's also no footage of that era at all. And I just felt like telling that whole story, as great as it is, just would have been a little bit like playing a greatest hits album of like, oh, you read the book and you want to meet the characters and you want to hear all the stories that Tony told. And, nothing really changed though for Tony throughout the whole period. I mean, where I kind of wanted to begin was the end of that life. Right. The first act of the film is the end of the Kitchen Confidential years, the end of him being in the kitchen, and then kind of all the transformations that come after it. So again, that was me feeling like I'm just trying to kind of take a deep sliver of a person's life and hopefully get something out of it rather than trying to be Wikipedia, which I think like a lot of times documentaries do. And like, that's for me kind of a hard thing to chase.
Yeah. Was there any, I think I probably have time for like a couple more questions here. Was there anything that you learned during the research phase that really surprised you about Bourdain?
I mean, I think his own insecurity, I mean, part of that is maybe shyness, but not even. I mean, I just think this sense that so many people told me he just had incredible imposter syndrome, that he always felt. Maybe it was because he had success so late in life and it was so life-changing that he just didn't trust it. He didn't feel like he deserved it.
Yeah.
Because people told me even up until the end, he would feel like, oh, I'm getting away with something. Like, and I think it's kind of, I mean, part of me feels like he maybe intentionally, nurtured that kind of feeling, because the other part of that is that he was very unaware of his importance. And, I think he would have been shocked by the impact his death had on people. I know people who were in his little world with him were utterly shocked by it. Yeah. But I think he intentionally, even he says in the film, like, I'm not a journalist, I'm not trying to inspire people, and I think he just always had this idea of like, I'm just doing a little cable show, or I just write my little books. It's also kind of just like a survival mechanism in a way, maybe to feel like that he's not important. He hasn't earned it in a way. It kept him motivated, but also kept him insulated.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about this this binder that you were talking about? I'm still caught up on that. The idea that you guys went through all of this stuff and had everything sort of organized by theme.
I'll tell you one other thing, which I've only talked a little bit about, but I'm happy to talk about it because I thought it was interesting. Is that so when I wanted him to voice all of the narrations, there were a number of things he wrote in his books that he never said anywhere. Or he wrote an article, but he had never voiced them. So we actually spent months creating an AI model of his voice.
No way.
And a few of the narrations in the film were actually an AI Tony saying those lines.
Wow.
Which is interesting.
I'm like, I want to ask you what they are, but I also kind of don't, just because I obviously couldn't tell. I didn't know that. So I wonder how much of that would be puncturing things. Do you want to say if there's any
I
one that
mean,
you want to call
I'll tell
out?
you off the record. I mean, deep fakes and all that are very ethically murky, but I definitely talked to his literary agent and his, I talked to everybody to kind of make sure that we're on board. We weren't putting words in his mouth. We were merely trying to kind
Right.
of articulate things he had already said.
Yeah, that's got to be the big difference, I imagine.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but thank you very much for speaking with me. And I really enjoyed the film. I was a big fan of his, and when he passed, I like still had a few episodes of the show on my DVR, and I just like couldn't ever get around to watching them. So your movie was my way of finally like jumping back into that world and engaging. I feel like a lot of people are probably going to be in that camp as well. So thank you for making this and doing a good job with it.
Yeah, it's great talking to you.
All right, Chris. So before you and I really dissect this, what did you think about Roadrunner overall? Before we get into the controversy of it all,
I thought it was pretty good. I think it's weird because I feel like it glosses over a lot of stuff. Like I get that it primarily wanted to cover Anthony Bourdain's fame, but I feel like the movie starts literally like as he's becoming like a big deal because of his book and his but he was like, I think he was like 41 or 42 or he was in his 40s when that happened, and he had a life and a career before that, and they really don't touch on that at all. And I thought that was a little like I wanted more, I guess. And I also feel like the last half of the film gets very close to being icky. I don't know if that's a technical term right there, but I don't know if you can call it like spoilers because it's a documentary, but basically, the last half of the film is about Anthony Bourdain's relationship with Asia Argento, who is a filmmaker, and she's the daughter of Dario Argento, the famous horror director. And she's not interviewed at all. And I had thought like they asked her to be in the movie, and she said no. But I read recently that they didn't even like reach out to her, which also feels kind of weird to me because that last half of the movie is basically all of Anthony Bourdain's friends talking about how much they just hate Asia Argento. And look, like they're going to have that inside knowledge. Like they actually, knew her and knew him. So I don't think they're like making stuff up, but I feel like the movie comes very, very close to being like Anthony Bourdain killed himself because of Asia Argento. Yeah. And look, I'm not saying that like something in the relationship didn't like inspire him to take his life, but it's not the same thing of being like, it's her fault.
Right. And
so
it definitely seems like, if that was a part of it, it was just that. It was a, one component of a larger thing because, the movie showcases several points over the years where Bourdain is constantly talking about death and taking his own life. And he seems like he's joking at some points. And he seems like he's kind of serious at other points. So I don't know if, it's certainly not fair to hang all of that on this one woman in this one relationship that he had. And the movie doesn't do that, but I kind of agree with you. I feel like it comes pretty close. And then because it spends so much time on that relationship that he had and sort of how toxic it was. And then the movie like goes out of its way to try to not blame her. Like one of the characters, I think specifically says like, look, I don't think that, that this is 100% her fault kind of thing. And so that feels like Morgan Neville and the rest of the filmmaking team trying to let themselves off the hook a little bit. But yeah, I can see how the word icky might apply there.
Yeah. And it's, and again, like I said, that like, those people the people interviewed in the movie knew Anthony Bourdain and they knew Asia Argento. So if they say, being around Asia Argento isn't fun, that's pretty much the theory they put forth. I have to take their word for it. At the same time, like I said, the fact that they didn't even try to reach out to her to interview really does not sit well with me. I don't even like Asia Argento that much, but it just seems weird that like they didn't at least like sent her an email or something.
Yeah, I think I read in it might have been Rolling Stone. If not, forgive me, please. But I think Neville was saying like, he didn't want to reach out because he was afraid that it would just turn into like a he said she said kind of scenario, and like I guess they, this is me speculating now, but I think maybe he just like didn't want to make that section of the movie that much longer and like open up this whole other like perspective or something, so he just decided to keep it focused there. That's the only sort of justification that I can come up with for not including her there. Okay, so I guess, are there any other topics that you wanted to or aspects of this movie that you wanted to highlight before we get into the controversy, Chris?
No, none that I can think of.
Okay.
I like I said, I thought it was overall it was a pretty good movie. I feel like people are like, especially after this controversy, I'm seeing some people who are like, this movie is abysmal, and it's like, all right, let's calm down. It's really not that bad.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed it for the most part. I did, like you, wish that it would have gone a little bit more back into his past and sort of laid some more groundwork there. But when as listeners will have just heard Neville say this, but when I asked him why the Kitchen Confidential portion was the starting point, he basically said that he didn't want to do like a greatest hits kind of approach to Bourdain's career. And I think he's going in expecting, he was approaching this expecting that a lot of people who are going to watch this movie have read that book and are more familiar with the earlier elements of Bourdain's life because he has talked about them so much. But I think for maybe a passive viewer, somebody who just like tuned in occasionally to watch No Reservations or any of his other shows, they may be left wanting a little bit more there. So all right. So, well, Chris, why don't you sort of set up the controversy and what you've heard about it, and we can go from there.
Right. So throughout the movie, it's almost like Anthony Bourdain is sort of narrating the film. And I accepted that as, normal because there's so much footage of Anthony Bourdain. He has all the shows he did and all the behind the scenes footage and all the interviews he did. So I was just like, all right, they clearly pulled all this audio from that. But there's this one part where he sends this really just sort of like bleak, maybe you could even call it suicidal email to someone. And they have audio of him reading it. And I remember distinctly thinking this as I was watching the movie. I was like, when did Anthony Bourdain record himself reading this email? And I was just like, that's odd. But I didn't really think much of it because it sounds exactly like his voice. And, there's nothing in the movie that says anything else. There's no like disclaimer that pops up on the screen that says, this isn't Anthony Bourdain's voice or whatever like that. So I was just assuming, he, at some point he must have read this email for some reason and recorded it. But as it turns out, Morgan Neville revealed in, he told this to you and he told this to a few people in other interviews that he put together basically like an Anthony Bourdain AI soundboard, and he was able to digitally put together the sound of Anthony Bourdain's voice reading this email. So it's not really him reading it. It's like a computerized version, but it sounds, exactly like the real Anthony Bourdain reading the note. And that's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. And I think the reason is, I think there are multiple reasons. One reason is I think it's just based on the way Anthony Bourdain died. Like, I feel like if Anthony Bourdain had died of natural causes or whatever you want to call it, people would not be this perturbed by this. But I think it's the fact that, he died by suicide and this email could be taken as suicidal. And the fact that they're digitally recreating that is, again, there's that word, it's a little icky. And again, I also feel like the controversy is because there's nothing in the movie that clarifies this. Like, when you watch like a Ken Burns documentary, like the Civil War, there will be people reading other people's words, but we know what's going on there because obviously there's no audio recordings from the Civil War. And at the, there'll be credits at the end that says like so-and-so's voice was read by, Peter Coyote and stuff like that. So,
right.
So we know it's a dramatization. It's not accurate. And as far as I can tell, there's nothing like that in this movie. And I feel like that's what's like throwing everyone off, because it's like, well, what the fuck, Morgan Neville? It's kind of like he was like trying to keep it a secret until he admitted it during these interviews.
Yeah, I mean, he brought it up to me, which I thought was strange. But like, you know, he was clearly like, just to be clear, I spoke with him before, you know, all the sort of controversy bloomed. So I don't know if he would have brought this up to me of his own accord, you know, if we did this interview 3 days after we actually recorded it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, he said when he was talking to me, like, that he reached out to like his literary agent, and I have this quote from Variety here where he says, "I checked with his widow and his literary executor just to make sure people were cool with that. And they were like, Tony would have been cool with that. I wasn't putting words into his mouth. I was just trying to make them come alive." And interestingly, his widow, whose name is Octavia, who is interviewed in the documentary, she quote tweeted that Variety interview and said, "I certainly was not the one who said Tony would have been cool with that." And a lot of people have retweeted that, and that has sort of like spurred, I guess, a new round of conversation around this whole thing. Because I was sort of in the camp of, yeah, this is a little weird, but I guess, you know, if it's his own words, and you know, he is like so well known for his narrations, and you know, maybe, you know, as long as his widow signed off on it, as long as, you know, the people in his life close to him signed off on it, maybe they know him. I mean, certainly they know him better than I do. My wife and I were talking about this, and she was just like, this seems like something that he would have hated. Like, he would not have been cool with that. But I was like, okay, I mean, I guess if they said it's fine. But now that his widow is saying that she didn't sign off on that, I'm wondering what those conversations were actually like between her and Morgan Neville. Like, when he was speaking with me, he was like, you know, I said his literary agent, and he sort of like trailed off. It sounded like he was gonna say his that he spoke with Bourdain's widow, but he didn't. So I don't know what's going on there. That's like a new wrinkle in this whole thing. But I mean, Chris, did you watch a lot of Bourdain stuff before he passed? How familiar with him were you?
No, you know, I obviously knew who he was, and I knew of him, and I knew what he did, but I never actually really watched his shows. I was just aware of them, and I've watched a few since his death, but I didn't really watch them beforehand, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like a diehard fan. I actually have not read Kitchen Confidential yet, although I bought it recently and it's on my shelf of things to read. But yeah, I've seen, you know, several of the shows, watched for a few years there, and it does seem like, you know, like all of the movie homages and all that kind of stuff, like the film goes out of its way to show that like Bourdain was a huge movie fan. And so like the way that this film sort of frames a lot of the references and sort of creates its own movie mood, all of that stuff I feel like is really in line with, you know, his interests and his likes and stuff like that. But yeah, this AI thing, even though it is his own words, it just, Neville says, I was just trying to make them come alive. And I wonder if there would have been a better, I mean, obviously, since this controversy is happening, there is a better way to have done this. Do you have any suggestions, Chris? I mean, like, it's easy for us to say now, you know, playing Monday morning quarterback or whatever, like looking back on this, but do you think that there's a different way that this could have been effectively used in this movie?
Yeah. You know, I really do think, I mentioned this before, like, if Morgan Neville had put some sort of disclaimer in the movie, like at the beginning of the movie, maybe like just text on screen, or even at the end of the movie, just somewhere that says some of Anthony Bourdain's narration here has been recreated with whatever the hell it is, the AI thing. I feel like if that was just in the movie, none of this would be happening. But it's the fact that no one knew this until Morgan Neville admitted it, and I'm sure he's fucking kicking himself right now because he's probably like, I should have never told anyone this, because if he had never said that, I honestly don't think anyone would have ever known. Like,
no,
because it's, you know, even if you know, aside from the ethics of it, it's like seamless. There's nothing that indicates this isn't real audio of Anthony Bourdain. Like, it sounds literally like he just recorded himself reading this email. So I feel like again, like if Morgan Neville had just put some sort of disclaimer in the movie somewhere, or failing that, had just had someone else reading that email. And the thing that is, I don't know if the word is ironic or not, but the scene starts off with, I forget, whoever the recipient of the email reading it, and then it fades into quote unquote Anthony Bourdain's voice. And if he had just kept it to be the guy who got the email reading the email, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it's, I don't think, I'm seeing a lot of people throw Morgan Neville under the bus, and I don't think he was trying to be, what's the word, sinister with this. I don't think, I do think he had the best intentions, but I feel like, he could have avoided all of this if he had just taken like one or two of those steps that I mentioned.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, because, the fact that he brought it up, this isn't something that like somebody uncovered during an investigation or something. He was like freely offering this information and was clearly like interested in it, and maybe like even proud of how, good a job they did putting this thing together and getting hiring a team to be able to run AI on this model and stuff. And like you said, I mean, the results sound just like him. It's really kind of amazing in that regard. But yeah, there's this whole, I guess, murkiness that sort of comes up around it. And I guess, there's questions about like how far is too far, and like, I don't know what, I mean, are there any big picture takeaways that you have here, Chris? Because I know that, we've talked about the concept of deepfakes and stuff before. And I guess like Space Jam, maybe like if we look at the new Space Jam movie, right? That movie features LeBron James and the Looney Tunes just running through a bunch of different fictional worlds and characters and stuff. And like you have the likenesses of a lot of famous actors who show up in that movie, that those actors, a lot of whom are dead, didn't sign off on that kind of stuff. So like, I feel like we're only at the beginning of an era where topics like this are going to come up pretty frequently. Do you have any just like broader thoughts on this?
Yeah, I feel like public figures, famous people, actors, all that, politicians, celebrities, famous people are probably going to have to start putting like, as ghoulish as it sounds, they're going to have to start putting like things in their wills where it's like, when I die, please don't put my voice in a Coke commercial.
Right.
It's like, we are on this, the technology is getting better and better. And I'm saying better in terms of quality, not better in terms of ethics. The technology is getting better every day. And we're going to reach a point where you can, we're kind of already there, where you can literally seamlessly put words in someone's mouth. And yeah, Morgan Neville, he's using Anthony Bourdain's own words here, but the fact that tech exists means you could easily have Anthony Bourdain's voice out there being like, go to Burger King, I love the Whopper, and shit like that. Right. So it's, where do you draw the line? Like you could say like, oh, I had only the best intentions, but that doesn't really matter if it's, wrong. And, I don't believe in like a fucking, afterlife or anything. So I don't think Anthony Bourdain is like up in heaven being like, damn you for you, like, but I do feel like people do want to be remembered in a certain way. And I do think Anthony Bourdain would probably not be cool with someone taking his voice and using it this way. But at the same time, there is that caveat where it's like, well, what the hell does he care? He is literally nowhere right now. He is non-existent. So it's like, I don't know where you draw that line, but I do feel like we are reaching a point where you're just going to have to, people are going to have to start putting this in their wills, where it's like, when I die, please don't put me in Space Jam 3.
Yeah. Man, I have such complicated feelings about this, because I feel like the fact that it is something that he wrote, I just keep going back to that. And yes, in this one instance, and I don't know. I certainly think he would have hated it if his likeness and voice was used to do a Burger King commercial or something like that. But, in this one case, like I'll just say it's very easy for me to see how Morgan Neville and his team, especially if they, as they said, like checked with people and maybe got the sign off from some people, even if his widow seems to disagree with that, that he would think that, okay, it's okay in this instance. It's like right at the very top of the mountain before if you take one step in either direction, you fall off onto a slippery slope, and like they're sort of like teetering on the edge there for me. But I'm curious what our listeners have to say about this. I'm sure this topic has raised a lot of conversation because people have very strong feelings about this. So I'm curious if anybody has any cogent thoughts that they want to send in to us about this topic, and maybe like the future of these kinds of incidents and or the Bourdain specific incident. I would love to read them. So if you want to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and any mailbag questions, you can do that to us. You can send those to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. And you can find the written version of this Morgan Neville interview linked in the show notes. If you'd like to read that and share it and pass it around or whatever, go ahead. That would be great. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features that you can find on the site. And you can subscribe to the show on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all of the popular podcast apps. Don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends, spread the word. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you on Monday.